Hello, I'm Robert, voluntary fact checker and helping you if you're scared of many things. And this is a short summary of why there's no risk of a world war or a larger war or spiralling from what's happening in Iran and Israel. And so I'll take a larger picture here. I'll do a separate video about how the risk is only very low for people even in the Middle East, and it's just in Iran and Israel, and even the risk to US bases in the Middle East is pretty very low, because Iran has lost so much of its capabilities, and because US has got good air defences. But this is about the larger picture. So Israel is just a very limited war compared with, say, if you've got people who remember the Iraq War, say 2003, or the earlier Gulf War in 1991. Anyone who remembers that, this is nothing like that, not even remotely approaching it. So Israel can only get to Iran by flying over Syria. It can't fly the long way around because it hasn't got refueling tankers. And so you can only do that because there are no Russian soldiers in the area anymore. So there used to be Russians in Syria until the rebels overthrew the Syrian regime. And those Russian soldiers are completely gone. No Russian air defences there, no Russian soldiers. There have never been Russian soldiers in Iran because they've never supported. The Ayatollah has got his own very strong military, and he keeps charge from his own military. He didn't need to be propped up like Assad did. And so there are no Russian soldiers anywhere in this region, and so the Israelis can now fly over Syria, and then they can fly over Iraq because the United States is not stopping them, and then they got to Iran. But they can't drop their biggest bombs because they haven't got this refueling for the same reason. They can only drop small, very precise bombs. And so there's much less risk to civilians in Iran, but I'll come to that in my longer video about other video on risk to civilians in the area. But and Iran is, as I already explained in the previous video, that they've got complete air control over Iran, and Iran is firing its ballistic missiles back. It's the Iranian fighter jets, as we just saw. They can't even fly because they would be shot down if they came anywhere near an F-16 before they could even see the F-16. So Iran is just firing its ballistic missiles, and bit by bit, as soon as they fire the ballistic missiles, the Israelis who are flying over in their planes, they can see where they're fired from. They can just go and then destroy the ballistic missile launchers, and they're actually destroying some of the ballistic missiles on their way up as well. So Iran is getting weaker and weaker and weaker military as a result of this. So this is a very one-sided war. Israel is very much on the top, got complete control over Iran's airspace. And Russia and China are not coming in. They could completely flip the war and just by selling. Iran's got lots of money. Iran is willing to spend billions of dollars on fighter jets if only Russia or China would sell them to it. But they won't. They're not going to sell it fighter jets they could use to fight against Israel. Indeed, they're not selling it anything. Air defences, fighter jets, nothing. So Iran is completely helpless. It's got no support from Russia or China, as I explained in my earlier video. Nobody is joining Iran, nobody will join Iran. And US, so I need to update that graphic. US, back then it said it would only defend. US did a single strike to support Israel, and that's it. So far, single mission to support Israel. And Trump is presenting that as the mission to end the war. So he wants this war to stop as quickly as possible. And he's not going to be wanting a longer war. But even if he did, it's nothing like the Iraq War. So look at the first Gulf War, which was to liberate Kuwait from Iraq. And most of the fighting was in Kuwait. And this involved 42 other countries from every continent except Antarctica. They were fighting in Iraq. So why didn't they say that's a world war? Because all the fighting was in Kuwait. And Iraq, it had tanks and things it was fighting in the sea and mostly on the land with tanks and things in Kuwait. And these were fighters from the sea, from the land, from the air, from all around the world, small contingents from all these countries. They were fighting against Iraq, and they eventually pushed it out of Kuwait. And that was the first Gulf War. That's the first use of tomahawks, by the way, in warfare. And it really astonished people and rather freaked them out a bit when we discovered what the tomahawks were doing. Now they could just fly into a building and even through a corridor that was big enough for a tomahawk. So that was the Gulf War back in 1991. But nobody back then was saying this would become a world war. Nobody said it was a world war. Nobody said there was any risk of Iraq fighting the world because it's absolute nonsense, and obviously it couldn't. And it was the same with the Iraq war in 2003. So back then they were saying that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. So why didn't... so there were lots of protests, but the protests weren't saying, look, you're risking a world war. The protests back then were saying, look, we don't believe they've got weapons of mass destruction. So lots of protests in the streets in the United Kingdom, the United States, saying that we don't believe, and it turned out they didn't have them. But if you could imagine taking modern social media, always on 24/7 news, so if you wake up and you can read the news straight away, you could put that back in 2003, it would have been full of completely people who know nothing, telling the world that Iraq could fight a world war and it could send nukes around the world. And that was utter nonsense. Nobody believed that. Nobody even thought of that during the Iraq War in 2003. And it's the same today. There's no possibility of a world war. It makes utterly no sense whatsoever. Nobody in the Middle East has any bases outside the Middle East. They can't fight outside the Middle East. They haven't got planes that can fly outside the Middle East. They haven't got ballistic missiles. Iran's got the longest range ballistic missiles in the area, apart from Israel, of course, which has got very modern technology. And it has its missiles, so that it can fire from the far end of Iran to anyway. So it can. It's not in that diagram, so it's not coloured in. But so it can fire from the far end of Iran to Israel, and that's the reason why they go up to 2,000 kilometers. It's got no interest and it has no ability to fight a war outside the Middle East. So that was that. Now we've come to this, and so yeah, maybe this is the better one to look at first. Iran can't have ICBMs because we need to test them first. So it's not even possible in principle for Iran to fire anything explosive at the United States, because it could very rapidly, if it's got its launchers to launch spacecraft into orbit, but of course nobody's going to let it fuel up the launchers and launch spacecraft into orbit right now. But if it had that, it could have added the aeroshells to them. It doesn't got that technology yet, but it's pretty simple technology. And with that help of an aeroshell, an explosive could withstand the re-entry and be set to explode somewhere in the United States. But it would take minutes to get through the atmosphere, and it would be very easy to shoot down. So that's not a useful weapon. And if we need to test an ICBM, which has to go through the atmosphere as quick as possible to avoid being hit, and then it's got a chance of getting through. Iran doesn't have that technology. It requires lots and lots of tests in order to get that technology. Very few countries have it. So Iran doesn't have ICBM re-entry technology. It's got this ballistic missile re-entry technology, which is much simpler for much shorter range. It enters the atmosphere much more slowly than for an ICBM. And there's just absolutely no possibility of it firing anything. So hopefully this can help you see there's no possibility of a world war in the Middle East. Just people don't have a clue what they're talking about when they say that. So not the remotest risk of a regional war or a world war. It's just Iran and Israel, and perhaps more of this continuing for some time, and that's all that we risk here. So that's my short video here. A short summary why there's no risk of a world war from Iran. It can't fight the world and doesn't want to. So I'll just upload that. And so to find the other videos, I'll do a playlist after a while, and then if you click on the video description, then you will find the link to the blog post, and the other videos are in there. And also, if you go to the end of the blog post, then you can get contact details and about our group that helps fact check people who are scared. I call Doomsday Debunker on Facebook, how to join it and how you can help and how you can be helped. That's at the end of the blog post. So, this is another short video to add to help people who are scared of all this, and hopefully you can see now very clearly that there's no risk of a world war, and Iraq can't fight the world, doesn't want to, and it can't. So that's it. My short title is Why You're Safe from Anything That's Happening in the Middle East.